If you have an endless argument that never stops, that just keeps kind of looping back to the beginning, this is identity and control that you're dealing with. If you have all of a sudden someone storming out or yelling or screaming and it's a sudden spike, that's control and safety. If you have somebody mocking you or kind of really passive aggressive behavior, this is identity and safety threat. If you have rage and maybe a shutdown and fear in the eyes, you probably have all three of those things. Your job is to see all that clearly. Step one is recognize what shift took place. Step two, diagnose. Then 6, we're going to pre-frame the tone. This might be uncomfortable, but it won't be unsafe. And then we're going to pre-frame ownership to avoid that side of the triangle. So we prevent a control battle by granting them agency at the beginning of this thing. You might say, I'm going to lay out what I see and you'll decide what you want to do with it. I'm definitely not going to tell you what to do. And another one you might want to throw in there is time and scope. You might say, I don't want to turn this into a 3-hour marathon. Let's keep this tight and really focused. I just want to talk about this one situation and not the entire story. A lot of what people have at the beginning of stressful situations is, this is never going to end. How long is this going to last? So you kind of diffuse that. And then you can load in a vulnerability pre-frame if it's useful to you. I might get this wrong, but I'm trying to be real. Is basically what you're saying there. And one thing that I say at the beginning of any of these is, if I misread something here, I want you to tell me immediately. I'm open to being wrong. I'm very open to being wrong. Another one is you can pre-frame the outcome of a situation. This is where you're going to say what a good result looks like to this person. You might want to say, John, I think it's probably obvious, but I just want to say it out loud. If we both walk out of this with a clearer plan and less resentment, that's a win for me. I don't know about you. And of course they're going to agree. And one good one for a argument, disagreement, or negotiation is, I think a good outcome for me, if you agree, is that we both understand each other's position, even if we don't change it. At any time in that conversation, you can say, John, let's zoom out just for 1 second. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that we're aligned. You're not saying that person is off. You say we might be misaligned. Then there's some curiosity. And this is just the framing curiosities. That's really interesting. Can you walk me through how you got to that? So you're leaning into something silly that they might have said just to drain the power out of it. Because if they have to re-explain something that was manipulative, it's always brilliant to do that. Get them to re-explain anything manipulative. And then the shared outcome reframe. This is, at the end of the day, I think we're both trying to get the same outcome. I think we're just might be taking different angles. Or the option framing. We can keep pulling this apart, or we can focus on what we can actually affect right now. It's totally your call, though. And anytime somebody is bringing something up that's not relevant, you just say, let's circle back to that in just a bit. There's one part I want to lock in first that we're talking about right now. And you bring back that it's something we're working on in the present moment. But then one I want you to memorize permanently is this process language, is this exact phrase right here. Here's where I got off track in the conversation. I started thinking that we were solving X, but we might be on Y right now. So you use yourself as the reason for the confusion, non-blaming. Number 4 is keep the frame on process, not blame. Process, never blame. The main tactic here is to refocus on forward motion instead of guilt. And then we have tactical curiosity. This one's pretty easy. You're just turning the question back into their logic. So somebody says, do you absolutely think that that was the right call? Imagine this as a response. You say, walk me through what you would have done differently. And then I would say controlled agreement is very, very good to be able to use when you need it. Controlled agreement, or somebody says, so you admit that you screwed this up. I can see parts that I would do differently, and I still stand by the core decision. My favorite of all, and this is my number 1 top favorite, is answering the real question. So they ask you one question, but you answer the one that's way buried underneath it. So you're bypassing the surface, respond to the emotional message under there. So somebody says, why don't you ever listen to me? And you say, it feels like you're not being heard. I'd love to change that. Or if they say, how could you miss something that obvious? You're frustrated, and I hear that, and I totally get why. You're responding to what's underneath. So this is a great one to practice on a very regular basis. We're killing the challenge by recentering on what we both want. Why won't you just take the blame for this? Because this isn't about blame. It's about fixing it so it doesn't happen again. The number 1 way to reassert a frame is to ask someone, what makes you say that? Just those words. If you want to kind of wrap this entire thing up, is what is it that makes you say that? And making them start to justify themselves. And the big question is, have you won more arguments than you've solved problems? And that causes somebody to kind of go back in their head, because it's kind of a little confusing question. And if the answer is yes, then they can see their own fault and you don't need to point it out. If the answer is no, they automatically get redirected back to the thing of solving a problem. And if you want to try it a different way, you use that question as a compliment. And you might say, we may be getting off track here. And I gotta say, you sound like the kind of person who's won a lot more arguments than you've solved problems, but I don't want to do that here. I don't want to argue. And I'm willing to lose if that's what's going to make you feel good, but I think we're both aligned on solving this thing. My favorite of all, and this is my number one top favorite, is answering the real question. So they ask you one question, but you answer the one that's way buried underneath it. So you're bypassing the surface, respond to the emotional message under there. So somebody says, why don't you ever listen to me? And you say, it feels like you're not being heard. I'd love to change that. Or if they say, how could you miss something that obvious? You're frustrated, and I hear that, and I totally get why. You're responding to what's underneath.